Today we are making a basket quilt block. So there are lots of different ways to make these, and over the next few weeks we will be doing a few different varieties. But for this block we're going to be making in the 10-inch size. And let's just get started here. We're going to need 2 squares of fabric, one in a color and one in a background. And these are both 6 inches. We will need 2 more squares of fabric, also in a color and a background. And these are 7 inches. And then we're going to just need some more background pieces. So we have 2 squares here. These are 2.5 inches. And then we have 2 rectangles, and these are 2.5 by 6.5. So let's just get started here. We're going to start off with our largest square of fabric, and this is going to be to make this big center half square triangle. So we're going to be making the 2 at a time method, and you will have an extra half square triangle. So you can use this for another block if you'd like, but we'll just use one for the block. So I'm just taking my ruler here, and I am just lining up the 1/4 inch marking of the ruler right from diagonal to diagonal of the square here. And then I just draw a line along the edge, and these are our stitching lines. So we will just go over to the sewing machine. We'll take our large 7-inch square and we'll place our background piece right on top with right sides together. So take these to the sewing machine and we will stitch along these 2 lines. Okay, so we have our pieces sewn together here, and I'm just going to trim them, cut them right in half. So I'm just going to line up my ruler from corner to corner, and then I will just cut between the 2 stitching lines here. And then the next thing we're going to do is just trim up these half square triangles. Now we're just going to be using one, so for the sake of the video I'm not going to trim up both of them. I will do that later when I am going to use it. But we'll just take our square up ruler and we will just line up the 6.5 inch marking right along the seam, and then we will trim both sides of the half square triangle. Okay, I will just grab my iron here and we will press this open. Okay, and then the last thing we'll need to do is just trim these little tails here. Just like that. So now we have our first large half square triangle for our piece. So let me find our other pieces here. So for these 2 squares of fabric, we're going to be making 8 half square triangles out of this. So to do that, we're going to mark our fabric up again. Just the same way we did before. The only difference is we're going to be going in both directions this time. So I'm just lining up the 1/4 inch marking on the ruler from diagonal to diagonal on the square, and then drawing along the edge. So this is just giving us a line that is 1/4 inch away from the center, and it just makes it easy because you can just stitch right along that line. You don't have to do any eyeballing or anything, you can just stitch right on the line. So we'll just take this to our sewing machine. We'll take our colorful fabric right side up. We'll take our background fabric right side down. We'll line them up. Then we're going to stitch along all 4 of these lines that we just drew. All right, so we have our square. We've got the 4 seams sewn. We'll just grab our cutting mat here. So now this is the 8 at a time half square triangle method. So what I like to do is I like to first start by cutting it in half horizontally and vertically. So I'm just taking my ruler here, I'm lining up the 3-inch marking along the edge, making sure that that is in fact the center, and then we will just slice that right in half just like that. And then we'll take our ruler and we will go the other direction, line it up with the 3-inch line along the edge of the fabric, and slice down the middle. Now the reason I like to do that is because they can wiggle a little bit, and these other ones have the seam right there. You're going from corner to corner. It's not as big of a deal if they get moved out of place a little bit. So we'll just take our ruler and we will line it up between the seams and slice each square in half diagonally. And then we will have our half square triangles. So before we can press them open, I'm going to once again trim them up. So I'm just using this half square triangle ruler. It has these markings on the side. We want this to be a 2.5 inch square. So we were going to line up the 2.5 inch marking right along the seam. And then we will just cut along the outside of the ruler, just like that. And then we'll just repeat that with all of the squares. Okay, so we have all of our half square triangles trimmed up, and we will just give them a press. Okay, and then we will just trim off these little tails and we'll be ready to assemble our block. Okay, so I'm going to have my my square here off to the side. I don't know if it will be in view of the camera very well, but I'm just going to have this so I can look and see as I'm setting up my square to make sure I have it right. So we'll begin with our large square, half square triangle. We want the color to be facing downward and to the right. And then we'll take our smaller squares and we're going to line them up along the top and the side. And these top ones, the color will be facing towards the downward and towards the left. And then our squares on the side are going to be facing upward and to the right. Okay, so then we have two left here. We'll have these will be our basket bottom here. So they just face upward and to the left here towards the half square triangle. And then just what's left is just adding in our square. So we have a square in the bottom and in the top corner, and then our rectangles along the side and the bottom. Now you can tell it doesn't look like it's going to go together, but once we get them all sewn, it will. So I just like to kind of lay it out because it helps me make sure everything is in the right place before I start stitching. So there's lots of different ways you could assemble this block. So the way I decided to do it is to just begin with the top here. So I have these 3 half square triangles and the square, and I'm just going to sew them all together. So right sides together, stitch them all together. Okay, so we have our pieces sewn together here. Just grab my pressing mat here and I will just press these. I'm just going to go all one direction. There's not a lot of nesting seams in this block, so we'll just do that. So there we have our top little row here. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take these 3 squares on the side, there's 3 half square triangles, and I will stitch these together in a row. Okay, so we have these blocks together and I'm just going to press them as well. Just make sure they're nice and flat. I just feel like blocks come together much easier when the pieces are flat. So there we have the side. So now at this point, I'm just going to take this strip and our center piece and we'll sew those together. So we'll place it right sides together and stitch along here. Okay, so there is one spot on this one where the seams can nest here. So we have this angle right here. If you press all of your half square triangles towards the colored fabric, then they should nest nicely. So this piece right here, you can tell that one seam is pressing one way, one is the other way. And so that makes it line up nice and flat here. Okay, so we have our square here. Because there is a lot of bulk with all these seams right here, I'm going to press towards this larger piece. Just it will go a little smoother because the fabric will more easily lay that direction. Okay, so then we have these 2 pieces ready to sew together. So I will just take this one, flip it right sides together, and stitch these. Okay, so let's just take this and press it open. Again, I'm going to press towards that larger block just because there is less bulk that direction. So just like this. So if I was trying to press this way, we've got all these seams in the way, it just would not want to lay flat, so it would just be a lot harder. So this direction, we just have this one in the corner here that's not really wanting to lay flat, but we can make it work a lot better than having to deal with all three of those other seams. Okay, so we have this part of our block done. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take these two pieces right here, right sides together, stitch right here. I'm also going to take the side pieces, all three of these, and I'll stitch them together. So I'll start with this one and then I'll add the square in a minute. Right, so we have our pieces for the sides and the bottom here. I've sewn them together and then I pressed them flat. We'll just take our bottom piece, flip it up, right sides together, and stitch along this edge right here. Okay, we will grab our iron and we will press this open. Let's see. Let me think about this here. So this one is pressed downward. If I press this one facing upward, then that seam will nest nicely. So we'll do that. Let me just set the seam and then we will press it open. Okay, so let's just place those on right sides together and stitch along here, and our block will be done. Okay, we have our block sewn together. Let's just give it one last press here. So that is how you make the basket quilt block. Like I said, there's lots of different varieties and styles of basket blocks, and we're going to be going over 4 more versions in the coming week, so stay tuned for that. If you'd like to make this in other sizes, I do have a printable pattern. I will have 3 different sizes in that, the 5-inch size, 10-inch size, or a 15-inch size. So happy quilting!